is kind of outside. Isn't really in some of the areas or most of the areas that we're going to be talking about, but you can see the legislature, you can see the executive, which is the government.
It's very small print if you see what we're seeing on the slide behind you. Are you able to zoom in?
No, but I probably can do this. So, can you guys see this when I do it, if I read it out loud?
Yes.
All right, so head of state is the president. The legislature, we have the speaker, the Knesset, and committees. Those come from the electorate. We have the mayors and heads and local councils. We'll really be concentrating up here. Then in the executive branch, which is the prime minister, the government, and the ministries, we will be concentrating here. And then Eitan will talk about the court system and attorney general. So does that give you a nice kind of, does that all make sense to you? Great. So the executive is the cabinet of the ministers appointed by the prime minister. The prime minister must appoint the distribution based on the number of the votes and must be approved by the Knesset, by the parliament. So the government is the executive branch, and the PM, the prime minister, is the head of that. The chairperson of this party usually becomes the prime minister, which is odd that it's not always. The current leading party is the Likud party. The current prime minister is Benjamin Netanyahu. A few years ago, I could have said the current leading party is the Likud party and the current prime minister is Benjamin Netanyahu, because that was happening for a very long time before there was a new government, which lasted about elections between when he wasn't prime minister and when he became prime minister again was about a year and a half. So, a year and a half, cabinet of ministers. It's a 4-year term. The ministers are known as MK, ministers of Knesset, and they are known as the government. The appointment process, the president, remember before when we saw up there, kind of hangs out by himself, or herself, but it's always been himself, but plays a really important part in this process. The president picks the person that he or she believes will be the best person to create a coalition, which becomes the government. Okay, so the coalition is the government, and it's within the Knesset. A little confusing, but we'll get to that a little bit more. The Knesset then approves it or not, and we often see, or we have seen, that hasn't always, it's not fait accompli. We see things change, and we see things not be approved, and have to go through it again. I just want to show you, and I'm not going to talk about all these, hopefully you can see them all, but I want to show you, this is the 1949 elections. And it's very interesting how many parties there already was in 1949. And I think it just goes to show what I was talking about, that flavor of being involved in building, whether it was in 1949 or, as it continued, more early parties, more parties along the way. Some of these parties kind of exist today, but under a different name, or they left one party and they joined another and then they came together. But this is a lot of parties for a state that's 75. So it's time to choose. A parliamentary democracy is a form of government where voters elect the parliament. Parliament members come from many parties. So you do not elect a prime minister directly. You don't get to choose that. You go and you choose a party that represents you the most. The president, as I said, picks the leader. Again, she or he believes can build a coalition. then ceremonially, that person is appointed by the president to try and create a government, a coalition. Now, remember that the Knesset, maybe I didn't say this before, but 120 seats are the number of people who sit in the Knesset, in the parliament, in the legislature. Coalitions, you need at least 61 seats to form a government, which is the coalition. Several factions and parties are not represented due to their low threshold, which is 3.25%. The state of coalitions is frequently volatile, and they can crumble quite easily. So let the forming coalitions begin. Go. This is how it starts. Everyone wants to be in the government. Everyone wants to be in the coalition. I would say everyone wants to be in the room where it happens. Okay, so votes of no confidence. Factions in the Knesset can express lack of confidence in the government. Following the motion, the faction has 28 days to basically come up with something that is better. As an example, in May 2015, Yesh Atid expressed a vote of no confidence in the Netanyahu government. Recommendations were put forth for Yair Lapid as the prime minister, and the proposal was defeated in the Knesset. But they often lead to stalemates or inaction, which is really problematic for moving forward with budgets. So it's a very vulnerable system. It's unstable. The government is supposed to last for 4 years. It often crumbles instead. There has not been a government since 1992 that has lasted its full term. The average government shelf life is about 2.5 years, and if we keep going the way we're going now, that's going to have to go down to about 2 years. Snap elections happen, votes of no confidence happen, and this creates an inability to pass budgets, as I said before. So now, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. Can you see this?
Can I try to move this closer and see if
Sure.
that helps?
Sure. Oop.
Further back. Yes, good point.
Well, that's okay. I don't have- Okay, so the top says the current Knesset makeup, but I also have the last Knesset makeup, and you can see again, March 23, 2021 was the election, and then the next election was in November 1st of 2022. Now, one of the things that you're going to see that looks strange is some of these parties, and I'm going to give you an example right now, Meretz, right here, isn't here. They fell below the 3.25%. Balad isn't here. They fell below the 3.25%. Meretz and Balad are two left parties. They would be over here. There are 64 people in the coalition right now. And in the opposition, there are 56. Had Meretz joined with Labor, which is what Labor wanted them to do, there would be about 4 more seats here. Had Balad not left the Chadash Ta'al or Ra'am, there would probably be another 3 seats here. Maybe 4, but I'll give it 3. What we end up with is an exact reverse. And it came down to something that incredibly small. And one of the reasons I show that is because everyone thinks, or many people think, that Israel has the most right-wing government it's ever had, which is actually true. However, it does not mean that everybody is voting that way. Some people may not have voted. Maybe people in the streets that are out there protesting didn't vote. Shame on them. But it shows the volatility, and it shows how voting in a coalition government, that something like this could happen. So that is what I really wanted to show here. There's other really interesting things inside this. I could spend an hour talking about it. This is the thing that makes me geek out. I love this kind of stuff. But that is where I will leave it, and over to you.
Okay, you hear me? Okay, good. So, hi, my name is Eitan. I'm going to switch to Hebrew now, if it's okay with you. No? Those of you who don't know me, I'm from Israel. But you got two in one. I'm also an Israeli lawyer, so I'm feeling comfortable talking about the reform, because it's pretty much a legal reform.
That's some adjusted over the left here, so it'll pick up better if you switch ears.
To the other one? Okay, like that? You're the expert. Is it better now? Do you hear me? Okay. Okay, it's, I'll get, just a second. I'll get into details about this reform because you probably hear a lot about it in the news, and everybody's pushing it. Either the democracy is ruined or, wow, we have to bring back democracy, okay, depending on who you listen to. And it's important to know the facts so you can form your own opinion, or even at least understand both parties, just have both perspectives, okay? Because it's about the details here. And you can stop me and ask me any question you want, anytime. I may allow you or may not, but just feel free to ask questions. So you ready? You ready to dive into the reform? Okay, good. So let's first start with how the judicial system works in Israel. There are three tribunals for civil and criminal law, regular courts that you go for that thing. First is the magistrate court, and then the district court, and then the Supreme Court. The interesting thing about Israel is that the Supreme Court also sits as the High Supreme Court of Justice, which is the same judges, just sitting in a different hat in a way of hearing petitions against the government or some administrative petitions, or to bring justice in general, okay? And they're important because they're like the cause of this whole reform in a way. So when you hear Supreme Court, they usually mean the High Supreme Court of Justice. There are other courts in Israel which are like religious, labor, military, administrative, and the religious one, there are four types of, like Muslims, Jewish, Christians, and Druze. So in a way, Israel allows everyone to be, I would say, judged by their own laws when it comes to marriage laws and some basically marriage laws and some property laws. The laws in Israel, it's quite simple. We have regular laws, like you all know, but Israel doesn't have a constitution, okay? Why? Because, you take Jewish people, Israelis, and try to form a constitution. I mean, it's almost impossible, okay? Everyone has their own opinion. So instead of constitution, in the 50s, they started something that's called basic laws, which are like regular laws that have like more like values and strength that will eventually form a constitution. But since nobody ever made it a constitution, Aaron Barak, which was this Chief Justice of the Supreme Court started in the 90s to call it, okay, I'm going to form a constitution for you guys, which pissed off a lot of people, at least half of the people of Israel. I'll talk about it later, just know the background for that. What's written in Hebrew is like the basic law, laws, regulations, and stuff. Okay, I'm going to dive into the reform before I give you the background to the reform, because it's important to know what the reform is first, okay? And that's a little bit legal, so if you don't understand anything, please stop me. Let me oh, wait, go. Just a second. Okay. So the first and I would say one of the most annoying one for at least those who oppose the reform is the judicial selection, okay? Because right now the committee is comprised of 9 people with some kind of a balance between politician and non-politician. Right now it's 5 for non-politician and 4 for politicians, which means politicians do not have a majority on this committee. And they do have like an unwritten agreement that one time a politician will veto a Supreme Court judge and the other time the other ones. So this is kind of a balance. However, the current government doesn't like it, so they want to change it. They want a majority in this committee, meaning they want to change it to 6 politicians to 5 non-politicians. Not only that, which pisses us lawyers most, they kicked out the lawyers from this committee, so lawyers, the Bar Association, basically have no say in choosing judges, okay? Which is like, why do you do that? I'll explain why. It's all connected, like all this one after the other are weaved together in order to get something, which I'll talk about later, okay? So they want to change the judicial selection. Of course, the Supreme Court judges totally don't want it, because if it's political, then they can choose whoever they want. There are no criteria for choosing judges. They can basically choose you to be Supreme Court judges if they want. They can bring anyone they want, okay? Doesn't make sense, and who knows who they're going to bring. Now, we know why Bibi Netanyahu wants to do that, right? I mean, he wants his own people there. More like conservative rather than liberal judges. Because right now, the Supreme Court is very, we'll say, liberal, okay? More like Democrat. Not many conservative judges. And the right-wing party, they want to bring more conservative. It's raining. The second thing is the judicial review over basic laws. Right now, the Supreme Court can have judicial review over any law. And the government says, we don't want them to do it anymore, okay? We're going to enact basic laws. You, Supreme Court, cannot touch it, okay? The third thing is the Prime Minister on fitness. Wait. Oh, okay. This is something that actually passed lately, which means that the Supreme Court cannot have a say over the fitness of the Prime Minister, okay? The only way that the Prime Minister can be declared unfitted is if he or she declared himself unfitted, or 75% of the government say that the Prime Minister is unfitted, okay? This is Bibi Netanyahu's ways to immune himself. Yes?
Has any Supreme Court in Israel ever declared a Prime Minister unfit?
No, but Ariel Sharon, basically, you know, when he got sick, he was in coma for once. So yeah, that's the only case, but it's not the Supreme Court because it was the general attorney, which also had this, but it was so clear, he was in coma for like months, okay? So everybody agreed, of course, okay? But is Bibi Netanyahu unfit? You tell me, I don't know, yeah.
But like here, okay, if somebody commits a felony, then they can't serve. But in his case, is he trying to avoid
Right,
his facing court for
right. So the basic law that covers the government, there's a basic law of government, is silent about it, okay? So the Supreme Court says if you committed a felony which has, Kalon, how do you say Kalon? Let's say a severe felony, then you cannot be a minister or a prime minister, okay? But how do you classify this felony to be like this severe felony? That's still open. So the general attorney is, and we can see it with Aryeh Deri. I don't know if you ever heard of Aryeh Deri. We'll talk about him later, who was like convicted twice for like bribery, and now he wanted to be a minister again. So where do we draw the line? And they did the Deri 2 law just for him, okay? And with Bibi Netanyahu, he prepares himself to be convicted, and will he be able to be a prime minister after he's convicted? We don't know, okay? The Supreme Court won't allow him, but he wants to be. So this is the unfitness. The override is the Supreme Court basically can have judicial review over the legality of regular laws, okay? And they did it 22 times up until now, okay? Now, this government doesn't like it, okay? And I'll talk about it later, why they don't like it, but they say we don't allow you to do that, okay? If you do that, we can enact a law with 61 Knesset members that override your decision, or we can enact a new law with an immunity clause saying you cannot touch it at all. So basically, stay away from our laws. That's what they basically tell the Supreme Court, which is a problem, which as I will say later. Deri law, the Aryeh Deri law, saying that the Supreme Court cannot have judicial review over the appointment of ministers. Doesn't matter if he was convicted twice. Doesn't matter if he gave bribery. Doesn't matter if he's a convicted felon. If we appointed him, if the people chose him, who are you to say that he cannot serve? Basically, that's what Deri law says, okay? Reasonableness. Oh, that's something that Aaron Barak, the Chief Justice, because he wanted to like open everything for judicial review, so he said, if a law is unreasonable, then we can change it or disqualify it. Now, that opens like a door for every judge to bring whatever he thinks, okay? Now, depending on the judge worldview, that's how they will say whether it's reasonable or not. And this current government said, no reasonableness, we want to take it away from you. Legal advisors are like the general attorney to the government and every legal advisor to every ministry. Right now, they have a binding advice. So the government must abide by their advice. So, and they're not political nominations. They are very professional. They want to change it to say, we're just going to take your advice or not, okay? It's not going to be binding on us, and we're going to appoint whoever we want, okay? But it's not as terrible as the other one, but still, like, very political. And the gifts law, the cherry on the top of the cake is the prime ministers and the ministers and administrative officials can receive gifts to pay for their legal and health issues. Sorry if I block you. And I guess you understand why this law comes from, right? Like if the prime minister can get gifts, basically the whole case right now in court against him is make no sense. Hey, I got a gift, but the law says I can get gifts. Now, what is gifts? Cigarettes and champagne, or money. No, it's also say money. You can get up to 5,000 shekels, if I'm not mistaken, from every donor. So you can get money, actually, to pay for your, and now Bibi Netanyahu spends a lot of money now on his legal, so this law is basically, is a custom law for Bibi, okay? To like, I don't know, justify his, no, not justify, like cure his issues, right? Okay, so now why are they upset at the Supreme Court? Okay, as I said, Chief Justice Aaron Barak in '92 started what we call a judicial revolution. Okay, he said something like that. Here, it is. Okay, where the Knesset enacted two basic laws: the human dignity and liberty, and the freedom of occupation. And Aaron Barak used these two laws to open the door for like a new constitution for Israel. Okay, So he said, everything is judiciable. Now I can take this and form it in any way I want. Because the Knesset or the people didn't form a constitution, I would say that those basic laws are the new constitution for Israel. And Aaron Barak did like a revolution. So there are 3 cases here, okay, just to give you like an idea of what he did. So the first one is Chevre Kadisha. It's called the Kestenbaum. You know what Chevre Kadisha is, the people who bury. The Kestenbaum law. So in Israel, when you want to bury someone, you go to the Chevre Kadisha, you used to at least before 92, and you say, you sign an agreement, and in this agreement they tell you you're only allowed to use Hebrew letters in your thumb. Okay, now someone, this Kestenbaum said, but my sister came from the States. Okay, I want to respect her and write her name in Hebrew and in English. Chevre Kadisha said, no, read the small letters. It's only in Hebrew. So he went to Bagatz, the High Court of Justice. And Aaron Barak said, well, people, I don't think you respect her dignity and her rights and his rights, and human dignity says that your agreement is not valid. Now, all of you say, of course, it makes sense, right? But Aaron Barak did something very radical here. He went to a private agreement, and he applied values from a basic law to a private agreement, which means right now every agreement in Israel is subject to those values from the basic laws. Okay? So every agreement that we write right now, well, is it human rights? Is it like fair? Is it all kinds of things that open it to what is fair? What is human right? Okay? And that opens the door to do whatever they want in a way to the judges. Okay? So this is one example. The other one, also that will sound to you like civil marriage, you know, between like, I don't know, gay people in Israel, okay? They couldn't register themselves as married in Israel, you know. They went to, I don't know, somewhere in New York, got married, come back to Israel. Ministry of Interior didn't allow them to be registered as a couple. So Aaron Barak came and says, well, not only you can be registered as a couple, but you have the rights and obligation of a married couple, even if you're same-sex couple, okay? So he bypassed the Rabbanut's monopoly, which really, really upsets the Rabbanut, okay? And they hold grudges on him from 2003 because you think about the Rabbanut, you know, like, oh, what are you doing here? Okay, and we have monopoly. By the way, Rabbanut in Israel, have monopoly over marriage in Israel. There's a law saying every marriage and divorce in Israel must be done through the Rabbanut. Okay, when we got married, we had 2 weddings. One reform, which is not considered a wedding in Israel, although it's under Jewish law. We did exactly everything that the Rabbanut will say. I said whatever I needed to say with the Tabat, but it's not marriage because it wasn't through the Rabbanut. And then we had to go to New York, marry again, and come back and register as Jewish people. This is how crazy it is, okay? It has nothing to do with Jewish law. It just has to do with monopoly and power. So Aaron Barak doesn't like the Rabbanut, if you haven't noticed. And the Rabbanut doesn't like Aaron Barak. And who's controlling the government now? The Rabbanut, okay? Remember that, the religious people. So this one. The third one, Bank Mizrahi from 95, basically set the tone for the whole judicial revolution. And he said several things. So the Supreme Court, SC's Supreme Court can cancel laws that contradict basic laws unless it's for a purposeful cause appropriate based on values of Israel as Jewish and democratic states and proportional. Now, these 4 things took us a whole year in constitutional law to understand what it is. And still, it's open for interpretation. And you can say, well, it's great because the Supreme Court, enlightened, liberal, court, will have the checks and balances over the government because, who else would it? In the United States, we have like 5 checks and balances here, right? Like there's the president, there's the Senate, there's the House, there's the Constitution, and there's the court. In Israel, there's only 3, but 2. Knesset and government are 1, okay, because they're the same, and the court. Take away the court, what do we have? Knesset and government. And that is the problem with those opposing the reform. Okay, so why are they upset with the Supreme Court? Okay, these all things together, some I talked about and some not. The ones I wrote in blue, by the way, do you have any questions until now? All clear? Okay. Oh, sorry, Craig, yeah.
So where did the Chief Justice Barak, the revolution he started in, I think he said 1992,
Mhm.
what did he rely on to enable himself to do that?
Right, so these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I would say, criterias or items that allow him to open up this, to create this revolution, and I can talk about it for a second. He's based himself on the basic laws. He says once those basic laws were enacted, the Knesset allowed us to interpret them in any way we want. And that is the first thing that's called substantial versus formal democracy, because this is exactly goes to your question. Substantial, formal democracy is like the Knesset or the parliament says something, that's how we should follow. But Alan Bach says, well, in Turkey and Egypt, they have formal democracy. Are they a democracy? No. When we go to test or to evaluate the law, we don't just read what the parliament says. We have to see what they meant to, not what they meant, what their objective meaning was. That's the substantive. So even if they said one thing, enlightened person would see it differently, and that's how I see it. So basically, he disregards what they say and say, what I think they should have said is 1, 2, 3. Okay? Now, for a Knesset, it's kind of annoying, because no, it's not what we said. Okay? But he said, no, I will put my interpretation into the law. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it is, and isn't that one of the main issues in this judicial reform?
Mm-hmm.
That the judges, and this is the argument that I understand.
Right.
The judges are, they are being selected based on, there's no criteria, basically.
Correct. Correct. Yes. And I think it's like here, the more conservative they are, the less, the less room they have to interpret laws, the more they will lean towards a right-wing government with their interpretations of the law, because they say, this is what the Knesset said, we have to follow. Aaron Barak could have bypassed that through this, trick that he found, substantial versus formal democracy. And the enlightened person is, what would enlightened person say in this case? Well, I don't know how to say what the enlightened person is. Maybe, it's here, young, Christian, white. There's some term here to describe like the typical American that sets the bar for certain things. So this is the bar that Aaron Barak says. Now, who's the enlightened person? Okay? Half of the country will say, well, he's not Sfaradi, he's Ashkenazi, probably, academic, because this is what the Supreme Court, you don't go and hear the people in Yerucham or Ashkelon calling an enlightened person. You go to Tel Aviv, the Yappies, or, Jerusalem, and these are the enlightened person. Who's an enlightened person? So,
Could you explain the number of people on the Supreme Court and how many of them are Ashkenazi and
Right.
how many of them are Mizrahi? I understand
Right.
there's a huge disparity there.
Right.
And that's one of the many problems that are being addressed by.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yes.
a few questions for
Yes.
the people who are watching on YouTube. If you can repeat the questions for the people.
Oh, so Craig asked how many Supreme Court judges are right now, and how many of them are Mizrahi versus Ashkenazi. So there are 15, and the government wants to increase the number to 18. Okay, just so they can appoint 3 more, not because because they can't fire judges. They have a lifetime role, and usually they appoint 1 Mizrahi, 1 Arab. There are women, men are I would say a little bit more balanced than it used to be, but it's not an issue, okay? It's more of having 1 religious judge, always 1 wearing kippah, 1 Mizrahi, and 1 Arab, okay? But still, that's out of 15. Not too many, okay?
The rest are Ashkenazi.
Yes, Ashkenazi, yeah. So this is the enlightened person, according to Aaron Barak. Now, okay, so the other thing is a judicial review of laws. As I said, you know, they basically disqualified 22 laws. Some of them really pissed off the right-wing government, has to do with more with Palestinian rights and stuff like that. Extending the standing, as I said, Supreme Court Justice, the High Court of Justice have a standing. You can't just go and file a petition, okay? You have to have standing, like something happened with the government or with the administrative, or something, some injustice cost you. So they expanded the standing, so what is injustice will be valued more easily in a way to allow more people to go to High Court of Justice. So now everything that happens, boom, petition to High Court of Justice, okay? These laws have like several petitions right now waiting. So the High Court of Justice is like the doorkeeper, in a way, of Israel's democracy, because everybody goes to the High Supreme Court of Justice saying this is unjust. Well, I can tell you, you know,
On that point,
Hmm?
on that point, isn't part of what this, I wouldn't call it a reform, but a coup, all about is making it so that human rights organizations would no longer have standing.
Correct, correct.
Only individual people
correct,
could have standing.
correct,
So
correct.
if you're a non-governmental organization or a human rights organization,
Mm-hmm.
you can no longer bring a case
Correct,
to the High Court of Justice unless it affected you personally.
correct.
And of course, Palestinians
Mm-hmm.
can't go there.
Right, right. You're right. I'm just jumping into the, right now there are 141 bills to follow the reform, and one of them is restricting organization, no, this one, I don't know, where is it? Standing in High Court of Justice to direct defendants and not activist organizations. Okay, so this is actually a bill that's waiting for the government right now, meaning that right now every human rights organization can file a petition saying what Bibi did is, I don't know, not democratic or against the basic law or whatever, and they do it constantly. So they the government wants to restrict it so only direct defendant can file petitions. So activists and human rights organizations basically have no standing in High Court of Justice. They block them. Okay, right now if the government will go and, I don't know, confiscate the Palestinian land, those activists will immediately go to High Court of Justice, and the High Court of Justice will probably say it's illegal. Once you block them, you know exactly what it'll do. So, so everything overuse. So I'm still wildly upset at the Supreme Court. So they overuse reasonableness. Everything is unreasonable. I talked about it. Everything is judiciable. Aaron Barak said that there's nothing outside of our reach. The Supreme Court can touch anything. Giving constitutional status to basic laws, not necessarily what the Knesset meant, okay? But Aaron Barak says this is your new constitution. They have a stronger power, those basic laws. Using objective, purposeful interpretation, as I said before, it doesn't matter what the Knesset says, it's what objectively we hear, in a way. So, in a way, we can interpret it any way we want. Eventually, the Supreme Court is becoming a judicial legislator because they enact new laws. And that is the basic thing that is really upsetting for the right-wing government, because they want to be the legislator. They said the Knesset is the legislator, not you. You interpret laws, but you don't create new ones. But the Supreme Court does create new ones. Now, right, wrong, think about our system. In a way, we don't have constitution, we don't have anything else, so it's either the Knesset or the Supreme Court. And what's the balance between them? So the day after the reform, what will they do? So they can pass any law the coalition desires using the immunity against judicial review clause, okay? They can say they just canceled the Chokit Notkut, like the separation law, meaning right now there are two yeshiva in the north of Judea and Samaria that can basically go back to a place where they couldn't before, okay? Chomesh, I don't know if you ever heard of Yeshivat Chomesh. And they can say, okay, we're building a new settlement here, and for the road, we're going to confiscate some Palestinian lands, and the Palestinian will go, no, it's against our property right. And then the Knesset can enact a law that says that for this yeshiva, they can confiscate and give some compensation, and it's okay. And if they do that with immunity clause, property laws worth nothing. And that's what I want to do. I know it sounds terrible. It sounds terrible. Later I'll talk to why they think it's okay to do that. Because there are always two perspectives to the thing. But right now, this is the case, okay? A Palestinian conflict. So one of the things they want to do is advance annexation on the West Bank, even in violating some property laws. Remember who's on the government right now, okay? Two very right-wing people. Bibi is considered like the centrist here. The two right wings, you know them, Bezalel Smotrich from Otzma Yehudit, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's a semi-Kahana. I don't know if you ever heard of Kahana. So, or maybe full Kahana. I don't know, depends who you're asking. What? You don't know Kahana? Kahana is Rav Kahana, Zichrono Livracha. He was very, very. He was against Palestinians in any way, and he proposed a transfer for the Palestinian. So they killed him. Okay, transfer means taking Palestinian and kick him out of Israel. Okay, they're very, very into annexing the West Bank and give Palestinians the minimum possible. Okay, so these are the two people that hold the government, the coalition right now. Yes, Debbie.
I think it's important to note, from my understanding, that the Kahana party, at one point he created a political party in Israel, was banned because it was considered too extreme.
Correct. Correct.
Now these people are followers.
Right.
That extreme
Right.
that
Correct.
banned.
Yes, so what Debbie said is Kahana was banned at some point, and you're right. And Ben-Gvir is like bringing Kahana through the back door. And probably he was convicted to committed some terror activities. Not like kill someone, he's a lawyer and it's fine. But he was, I think, promoting some agenda that sounds a little bit like, have a flavor of terrorism in it, okay? In other words, they're very into like, the entire land of Israel is ours. The Palestinians are here, what can we do? But let's give them the minimum possible. Okay, so they want to annex the West Bank, in other words. Okay, and this reform will allow them to do that. Because once they enact an annexation law with a 61 immunity, Supreme Court can say nothing. Very simple. The other aspect is punish Palestinian terrorists and their families more severely. That's something Ben-Gvir wants to do. Because right now every terrorist attack and the government wants to destroy their house, they immediately go to the High Supreme Court of Justice. Sometimes they approve it, sometimes they don't. Right now, the Supreme Court will have no say about it. Religion, another big issue in Israel, maybe the biggest one. Pass religious laws. And I'll show you in the next slide what kind of religious law they're referring to. And get permanent army duty waiver for Orthodox. I don't know if you know, but religious people or ultra-Orthodox do not serve the army, okay? Why? Because Ben-Gurion in 48 had like a status quo agreement with them saying, you know what, fine, I'll let you off the army for right now. Let's see where we're going. I don't want to deal with it right now. So 75 years later, we're still dealing with the same thing. So they don't go to the army. And there was so many petitions to Bagatz, and I'm not going to get into it, but right now they want a permanent waiver. Okay, because every government is threatened. The former government, by the way, with Yair Lapid and Bennett, started something that maybe will take it away from you, this privilege that you can study Torah all day while we work and go to the army. Why don't you join the army too or do something? It really upsets them because they want to study Torah the whole day. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. From their perspective, they're right. And we can talk about it later. From the government, so it's protect the government and the prime minister from prosecution. And I'll talk about it in a different slide. And allow officials to receive gifts, as we said before. So there are 141 bills to follow the reform. I just mentioned some of them, which you'll find interesting. Limiting the ability to disperse the Knesset. Okay. It's crazy. Inability to investigate the running prime minister. Again, Bibi law, because he's under investigation. Allowing officials to receive donation, allow more political positions, separating general attorney from DA. It's something a little bit technical. The Supreme Court Chief Justice will be a political nomination and not seniority. Right now, the oldest Supreme Court is becoming the Chief Justice. The standing, as I said, to activist organization will be limited, and police will be more under the control of National Security Minister. If you read the Israeli news lately, in order for Bibi Netanyahu to allow the delay until July of his reform, Ben Gvir, which I mentioned before, requested or demanded that he will have a National Guard under his authority. Now this thing is really upsetting many Israelis, because National Guard under Ben Gvir, who was like convicted to be a terrorist and is very militant, meaning a private army for Ben Gvir. Now, can you think what a private army of Ben Gvir will do? You go to Mount Temple, you know, and he can go with his bunch of bullies and say, now I'm going and praying. Why? Because that's what I want to. And you have a whole army to protect it. Now, I don't know what's going to happen, but that's what people are afraid of, you know. And this guy didn't serve in the army even one day, and you let him control a National Guard. And that was his demand, in a way, in order to get the delay. So Bibi has to give up so many things to keep his coalition, and I don't know what is better, but that is the case. So the right side, I mentioned more like religious laws, like studying Torah is equal to serving in the military. Rabbi, maybe you like it?
I doubt it's for women.
Oh my God. So there's a whole thing about studying Torah for women, which is like, in a way, not allowed for ultra-Orthodox, you know. So, but that's a whole new discussion. Hospitals will ban chametz on Pesach. That's something they passed. I can understand it. You know, if you're religious and you're in a hospital, you don't want to see chametz. But it still create a big deal. Canceling the kashrut reform.
Well, and it involves being able to search people as they come in.
Right, correct. And hospitals already said, we're not going to do it, okay? The next one is kind of upsetting, canceling the kashrut reform. The kashrut reform saying that right now kashrut in Israel is controlled by the Rabbanut, the rabbinate, okay? And if you want to have a Tudat Kashrut, like a certificate of kosher in your restaurant, you have to go to the Rabbanut. You have to pay them money, and you have to follow their rules, okay? It's not only, I don't cook not kosher food, it's if you open on Shabbat, you don't get Tudat Kashrut, which has nothing to do with Judaism, it's just their own rules. So the reform says, let's have private organizations that will give Tudat Kashrut, like Tzohar, which are rabbis, just not like, you know, blacks, more like a Kippah Sruga, like, you know, like Bnei Akiva or, you know, Zionist rabbis that can also give, or private organization. The Rabbanut, of course, it takes away one of their sources of funds. So, of course, they want to cancel that, okay? Why? It makes no sense. It's just a power game and a monopoly. Rabbanut can rule over civil matters. So now they want to extend their standing. So if you're a religious person, instead of going to a civil court, you can go to the Rabbanut to be the judges on civil matters. They only, not only, but they usually rule by the Jewish or halakha, basically. And now they're not reconstructionists, okay? So their halakha may be different than what you know. Increasing the number of Supreme Court judges to 18. I spoke before, and restricting organization helping Chozrim B'Sheila. That's another, you know what Chozrim B'Sheila is? Like Chozrim B'Tshuva is if you're secular and you want to be religious, then you Chozer B'Tshuva, you become religious. Chozer B'Sheila is the opposite. If you're religious and you want to become secular. So there are, and if you do that in Israel and you're ultra-Orthodox, your family will, you know, ban you and kick you out, and you have to go and start your life from scratch, and you don't have education because all you did is study Torah, you don't have work. So there are some organizations that help these people. So this religious government now wants to restrict these organizations, okay? Okay, what is it? We call it reform, but is it, some people say, well, maybe it's a revolution, maybe it's a coup, I don't know. These are the definitions of reform is changes made by current government without changing the game itself. I think they're changing the game a little bit. So I think it's more than reform. Revolution is substantial changes in political, economic, and social made by a larger group of people. How large it is? Maybe half of the people. Is it large enough to become a revolution? Again, not sure. A coup is abrupt change in power replace the government. It's not the case. I don't know which one. I think it's somewhere in between right now. So we still call it reform, but it's, I think, a little bit more than reform. What is the purpose of this reform? That's interesting. So the official reason is improving democracy by creating a balance of power between authorities. As I said before, for the Knesset people, the Supreme Court is taking the role of a legislator, and that shouldn't be in a democracy. There is legislator, and there is Supreme Court or judicial. Okay, so they say, let us do our job, you do your job. So they say, it's not balanced right now, okay? Another thing is diversity in the Supreme Court. Why all the judges are Ashkenazi, in a way? That's, or not just Ashkenazi, more like liberal. Let's bring more conservative judges. The underlying reason is, of course, advancing the annexation plan in the West Bank. They cannot do that under the current law because the High Court of Justice will probably disqualify many of their attempts to do that. Applying religious laws and allowing Bibi is Benjamin Netanyahu, to maintain his prime ministership in Deri, the Aryeh Deri, to become a minister. Okay? Okay, so what is the rhetoric they use? So the supporters say Supreme Court shouldn't be run like a private club of judges because they choose themselves. And the opposers say, well, judges and politicians already have mutual veto rights, which creates some balance, so it's not really a private club. The other one is, let's be like the US, judges are elected by politicians. However, the US Senate approves the nomination without automatic majority to the president. Here in Israel, the Knesset, the prime minister have automatic majority in the Knesset and the government, so it's not the same. And also, let's also limit the prime minister to 8 years and separate religions from state, if you want to be like the United States. And let's have constitution. But of course, they only take one argument and leave the rest. Court is controlled by the elite, like the Ashkenazi elite. And the opposers say, well, who's promoting the reform? Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice. Oh, very Ashkenazi. Bibi Netanyahu, oh, very Ashkenazi. Simcha Rotman, the head of the Judicial Committee in the Knesset, very Ashkenazi. So why are you saying it's Ashkenazi Sephardi thing when all of you are Ashkenazi? So please, at least be honest about your motives. And Supreme Court interferes with public policy and acts like a legislator. Well, for lack of constitution, someone should do it. If not, coalition will have unlimited power. Any questions so far? Yes, Rabbi.
This may be getting into a can of worms, but I was struck by seeing the reasoning around annexation in the West Bank as a big part of as a flashpoint in the rhetoric, given that I've also been reading that Palestinians are not really participating in the protest movement much and don't really see themselves as having a stake in this particular battle. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Palestinians who are not Israeli citizens?
Both Palestinians who are Israeli citizens and Palestinians who are not Israeli citizens, from what I've read, seem to be not particularly participating in this.
I think, right, I think they gave up. Those who are not Israeli citizens have no say for sure, okay? But those who are, I think they gave up. They don't even go much to vote for their own parties because they say, no matter what we do, it's not gonna change much, okay? This country is still controlled by Jewish people, and we have no power to, change it. So I don't think they want to be part of this game. So that's what I think.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
I think Israeli Palestinians, some of them would, the part about annexation would prefer it. So I'm not saying all, but many of them would prefer annexation. Many more of them
Mm-hmm.
within the state of Israel.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. One of the main argument against what they're trying to do is that annexation will create a one state, basically. Now, according to Smotrich, it's a one state, but with inferior rights to Palestinians, so they're not going to get citizenships. But the other ones opposing said you cannot do that. If you go for a one-state solution, annex everything, eventually you'll have to give them citizenship. Otherwise, the whole world will call you apartheid state. And you're open, as you said, a can of worms here, and it's very dangerous. So don't even go to this direction. And the Palestinians know it. They know that if once annexation will take place, eventually they'll be citizens of Israel. And once they're citizens of Israel, I think within something like 50 years, they're going to be majority. Boom, they got what they wanted. So unless you let Smotrich and Ben-Gvir rule the government for 50 years, have their own army and never give them any rights. I don't know how it's going to happen, but that's their plan at least. Yes, Debbie?
So if history plays out and this government falls, what are they putting in place now that would prevent them from losing power? Are they, you know, or is part of their tactic a way for them to keep power ongoing by the reforms that they're making?
Right. So one of the laws is like that limiting the ability to disperse the Knesset, as Kelly said, the vote of non-confidence. I mean, you will still be able to do that, but it's going to be limited. You'll need to have right now. I don't know if you ever saw the Knesset, but like usually it's like I wouldn't say 10% filled. You know, like out of 120 members, maybe 10, 20 come to every vote. So technically. If 3 people are in the Knesset and 2 vote non-confidence and 1 says I oppose, then the government falls. Okay, they know in advance, so they all come, but so they want to prevent it and say you need a certain number of people, not just majority, but the number of people to disperse the Knesset. So this is one of the things to do that. The Prime Minister on fitness is another thing. Okay, you cannot, even if Bibi is convicted right now, he will still continue to be a Prime Minister. Okay? Other than that, there's not much they can do, because that's like really changing, becoming a dictatorship. Okay. All right, so now it's a timeout until July, as you all know. So what's the status of the laws is the Prime Minister declared unfit passed. The rest are still waiting. So first, in the Knesset, whenever you enact a law, whenever you want to enact a law, you need 3 votes: the first, second, and third. And if it's a private bill, then you need the preliminary one, so it's 4th. So you see, some of them passed the first vote, some of them not, and they're waiting. So the government right now is saying, okay, if the negotiation with the president won't yield any successful result, we're ready with all our bills, just put them for a second and third vote, which can happen the same day, and boom, we're going to pass the reform. So just know, people, behave yourself. That's what they're telling the opposition who's negotiating with them. So Bibi's conflict, that's another interesting issue. Okay, so in 2020, Bibi Netanyahu signed a conflict of interest undertaking that was approved by the Supreme Court, saying that if he's a prime minister, he cannot touch anything that will affect his trial, because he's on trial right now, a criminal trial. And he agreed to that, and that was one of the reasons he became a prime minister, without everybody going to the High Supreme Court saying, hey, he's biased or have conflict of interest. So on March 23rd, the Knesset acted the law that the prime minister, the unfitness one, so only the prime minister can, declare himself unfit, which is okay, by the way. A comparative law says that other democracies have similar, in a way, arrangements. United States, New Zealand, Germany, Canada, other countries in Europe, which all is fine, okay? But on that day, Bibi says, well, I'm back in the game of the reform after this law, because right now nobody can kick Bibi out of being prime minister, even if he's acting in violence of his conflict of interest undertaking. So the general attorney immediately said, well, Bibi, you cannot do that. And immediately, activists went to the High Supreme Court of Justice, says, it's against your undertaking of conflict of interest. But Bibi says, no, it's a matter of national security, and I have to be back in the game. So right now, it's in court, okay? But just see how Bibi thinks with one law leading to another. The financial damages of the or benefit of the reform. So the supporters said that Israel economy will benefit for the long run, and whatever happens right now in Israel, like high-tech companies pulling out, it's part of the general tendency in the world and recession, et cetera, et cetera. And the opposer says they bring numbers. They say Israel will suffer 300 billion shekels, which is like almost a little bit less than $100 billion in the next few years, and the credit score will plummet, and high-tech companies are already pulling out money, and it's going to be an unstable investing environment, which is already is, because when foreign investors come to Israel, one of the things they ask is the legal environment stable enough for us to invest? They have a list of criteria, okay? So usually they won't go to invest in dubious countries, okay? And Israel was very safe for them, okay, because of the Supreme Court. Now, if you're limiting the power of the Supreme Court, those investors are saying, okay, we'll wait to see what happens. And there are really, really decreasing investments in Israel right now, and which is a problem, okay? Even if the reform will not pass, there was a precedent already, the damage was already done, because right now everybody will be scared that maybe they'll do it again, because it's possible. What are the forces that drive the reform? And these are the two perspectives of each party. So Bibi and his fellows said the desire to control the country, is it like a desire to control the country in some dictatorship, or improving democracy and correcting injustice? So, of course, Bibi and his fellows will choose the later, and the opposers will say this is a dictatorship in a different form. The religious Zionists, which are like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, are they like a radical messianic movement pushing for halakha state that rule over Palestinians, or are they fulfilling our true mission as Jews in the land of our ancestors? From their perspective, which we cannot say is wrong, because that's their perspective, the land of Israel was given to us in its entirety, okay? That God, Abraham gave us the country, and now the Palestinians somehow found themselves living there by mistake. So we came back to our country. This is our country. That's what they believe, okay? And who said they're wrong?
I say they're wrong.
Because you have a different opinion,
Yeah.
which is great.
Your perspective isn't equally right.
Which is great, but I'm saying if you sit in their hat from their religious perspective, they're like, no, we can only fulfill our mission if we control the entire land. I'm not saying let's kick out, they don't say let's kick out the Palestinians, but say, Palestinian, let go of your aspiration for a state. You can live here, get like autonomy, get whatever, but it's our country. That's what they believe. That's what they say. And this whole reform is constructed around getting them to this statehood that they want. The Haredis, the ultra-Orthodox, are they leeching on other people's money with minimum contribution, or they're studying Torah so that Israel and the world could exist in the first place? From their perspective, the world exists thanks to the Torah, to the existence of the Torah. And now, in order for the Torah to exist, you have to study Torah. You have to sit every day, study Torah, read the Torah. Someone has to do that. Okay, exactly like the tribe of Levi were dealing with religious issues, and the rest gave the money. That's the Maaser, the 10%. Exactly, they say, okay, we study the Torah. We defend Israel by studying Torah. They truly believe that. You maybe go to the army, we study Torah. It's equally right, and they have a new bill for that. Now, can you tell them they're wrong? I can't. You can. Okay, well, good. I guess. Yes.
I have a question. I heard somebody put out there, and I have no idea whether this is just a completely off the wall idea, or if other people are talking about this as well. But the idea was that one of the forces that drive the reform are like conservative Christian second coming folks that want these things to happen so that for a Christian idealism.
You see, I've never read it in any Hebrew newsletter, or media
So that's
website.
common.
Not in Israel, but maybe underlying. I mean, there's also Kohelet. I don't know if you ever heard of Kohelet, those people who, but I first put them there because they started this, but their CEO or whoever runs the Kohelet, he a little bit changed his mind lately. So he's like, they went too far, so I took them off. Yes, Rabbi?
I think to clarify, Christian Zionists are not a prominent political force on the ground in Israel, but they are a prominent American funding force for these political parties.
Got it. Okay. So maybe, I don't know. I mean, these are the forces in Israel, I would say. Yeah. I'm sure there are more, but we don't know about them. You want to say something? Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, they support him. Yeah. Okay. So we said many things against maybe the proposed reform, but maybe there is some reform that is needed anyway. And there are many professors, law professors, and people, and even the president and the opposition say, well, there's some reform that's needed. But let's not take it to the extreme. So what is the reform that is needed? So judicial selection, it's balanced, let's not change it. Judicial review over basic laws shouldn't be. I mean, shouldn't be maybe with a special majority of the Supreme Court. That's what the president offered. A special majority by the Supreme Court over judicial review instead of just eliminating it. Prime Minister on fitness, no change meaning don't touch the current law. That's what it means, no change. The Knesset override, well, of course, no immunity clause, and maybe override only by special majority that will include the opposition. If the opposition and coalition agree on something, then we all know that it's okay. But 61 is basically coalition. The Dairy 2 law, definitely no, okay? If you're convicted twice in court, in felony, and by the way, he undertook not to go back to political life. He went back again. So, I don't know, but his followers don't buy this argument. Reasonableness, limit reasonableness, but don't cancel it completely. Legal advisor also, don't make it political. And let's enact additional basic rights like free expression, equality, demonstration, just to complete the Constitution, because right now the basic laws do not cover every aspect. So there is something that can be done, and right now I think they're, negotiating over them. So the reform itself is not bad by its nature, just what the type or nature of the reform maybe can be changed a little bit. So currently everything is paused until July. This is the Declaration of Independence of Israel. And the real question remains, what is the identity of the country? Simcha Rotman, who's one of the architects of this reform, said in the United States yesterday, this reform, whatever happens right now in Israel, it's a religious war, okay, between religious people and secular. That's how he sees it. And we always ask ourselves, what are we? Are we first Israelis? Are we Jews? And what is being Jewish and maintaining democracy? If you know the national basic law, I think it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, basically said that Israel is a Jewish state, but not a democratic state. They took off the democratic. So can you be Jewish and not democratic? Some rabbis in Israel it cannot be. If you're Jewish, you have to be democratic. Some people say no. It's a big question. And these are questions that are keeping us busy right now. How do we define democracy? What are we first? Because there are many Israelis. There are Israelis who are not Jews. Okay? For some people, they're first Jewish and then Israelis. So these are questions. There's no answer. We try to define them right now. So do we take this opportunity to better define who we are together, or we're just starting another civil war? We had 2 already. They destroyed the temple. This is not far from it, I would say. Because I think this is the biggest issue right now in Israel. Okay? It's all of a sudden all the secular people come out and go and protest and demonstrate against what they see is like taking over the country by religious and right-wing people. Okay? Up until now, they were quiet. They weren't united around any, I would say, one goal. Religious people are very united. They have a goal. Halakha country or annexation of the West Bank or whatever. Yes?
Let's not equate religious with ultra-Orthodox. There are religious
Right.
Israelis who are not
Correct.
ultra-Orthodox.
Correct. You're right.
And even various streams of ultra-Orthodox with each other. I mean, the Haredim and the Hardalim are in coalition with each other to achieve their separate goals, but they are not the same goal.
Correct. So, yes, correct. It's not right to say religious in general. You're right. And even among the Likud, there are many religious people who support Likud, but they don't support the reform because they're not like ultra-Orthodox religious people. And yes, yeah. Yeah, the Mizrahi, yeah, they're religious. Again, more traditional religions than, religions with strong ideology. Yes?
Just a bigger implication question. Israel consistently touts itself as the only democracy in the Middle East. I mean, that's the brand. And then Israel and the United States just continually talk about their shared democratic values. So I guess I'm wondering those 2 kind of basic pillar notions, what do you think are the implications of all of this for those ideas?
So it depends who you're asking. If I'll be the government, the supporter for the reform, I say, well, we're going to strengthen democracy by creating a separation between the branches. Because the legislator should be the legislator, the Knesset, and the Supreme Court should just be the judicial branch, okay? And we're bringing more justice. The other ones will say exactly the opposite, okay? So again, the question is, who are you asking?
He's asking you, Eitan.
And I also think the rest of the world, I will say this too, I'll ask you, but also the rest of the world does seem to be coming down on the track of saying this is fundamentally anti-democratic. And then also saying if we're uniting, the United States and Israel on the basis of shared democratic values, and this is happening, we need to ask some questions about that. But I'm curious what you think about that.
Me personally, I think it's a combination, okay? I try not to take any extreme position versus or against. I think some reform is needed. I think they take the reform too much to the extreme in order to support their private agenda, okay, of like supporting Bibi so he won't be persecuted, and annexing the West Bank, and limiting the Supreme Court. Now, it doesn't matter what I think, because it's my opinion. I like Aaron Barak. I studied Aaron Barak as a law student, and I loved what he did. Did he take it too much? Yes. A little bit too much. That's what I think. Not just me. 200 law professors just signed a petition saying, let's create boundaries to know exactly what we're doing. You cannot say everything's judicial, because you're replacing the government. So, as I said, some reform is needed. The way they do it right now is not for the benefit of the people. I think it's the benefit of themselves. Okay, and that's the problem here. Yes, Debbie.
Well, I'm just thinking about the whole fire just got stronger when Bibi fired Gallant.
Mm-hmm.
And it became, to me, a very clear picture of, if you don't agree with me, you can't be part of my world, my government, and I'm just gonna only have advisors that will support what I believe in. And I'm just wondering, I don't know, I never followed up to see if BB actually came out with a reason, or was it just simply that Gallant said, I think we need to pull back on the reform and that, you know, what, I'm just asking.
He doesn't trust him. It's very simple. He didn't say much, but he doesn't trust him. I think it's kind of obvious. Yes. So right now, Der is trying to convince Gallant to say, I'm sorry to Bibi, so Bibi will keep him in a position. So right now, we don't know. Maybe Gallant will still be the prime minister. And it's not just Gallant. People are really scared of Bibi. Okay? He's a vindictive guy, and people have a strong opinion against the reform within the Likud. They're afraid to say that. Okay? If they'll vote against, they'll be kicked out of the Likud. Because Bibi is 6-time prime minister. He controls the Likud. And that's a little bit scary for people in social media. Barak? Supreme Court? Ask it again. Did he?
The power that the Supreme Court tried to
Mm-hmm. To gain?
establish,
Mm-hmm.
to avoid what's giving Netanyahu the power of the government to be circumvent.
Well, Barak is retired, by the way. He's not, you know. No, it's before Bibi. He started it like right. He created a revolution that continues until today, for sure. Circumvent? Yeah, it's been earlier. Yeah, it's been earlier. Yes. Sorry, no, sorry, behind. Yes. Yes.
In your argument. So I have two questions. One is it appears that historically, that as Israel has moved to the right, and this is a question, not a statement, is it the case that as Israel has moved to the right, that the political coalitions are more anti-pluralist than the center-left coalitions were, in the sense that they don't respect, they're about enacting laws that don't respect a wide range of plural positions of different groups. That's the
Yes.
first question. But the second question is that true of the court as well? Has the court taken such a individual rights orientation that individual rights orientation also violates the kind of pluralism that you seem to find appealing? And so the question then becomes, from your perspective, it's not just, did the court go too far? The question is, can Israel, without a Bill of Rights, for example, find a way towards
Right.
pluralistic kind of, a legal regime that supports the kind of pluralism that you seem to find?
Right. I think the answer to both questions is that Israel becomes more extreme in any aspect okay? The religious people become not more religious, but they allow themselves to express their religion's opinions more loudly, and they have more power because they grow in society. The other, as I said, are not united against anything. Also, they're silent. I would say the secular. Okay, there's no left wing in Israel. Okay, the left wing Meretz is it didn't get into the government, so we have more like center and right, nor left. Okay, so and this is this is what happens. The process of what happens in Israel. So we're becoming, I think, more extreme and more, I would say diverse, but more like split between us. And that's the frightening thing, because how can we create a discussion between people who have a strong ideology on one hand that's against pluralism, and the other ones that are very, very pluralist and liberal, okay? Only if we understand each other and allow ourselves to live with each other. But the non-pluralist, the ultra-religious parties, they do not accept anything other than their own opinion, and that's a problem, okay? And in a way, it's a problem also with the negotiation with the Palestinians, because once you say, these are my red lines, I don't want to negotiate around them, so how can you negotiate? So, do you negotiate? I don't know. This is the problem. I don't have a solution to that. You ask me my opinion. I think the world goes to be more extreme, and that's a problem by itself for pluralist people, not for the other ones, because from their perspective, we have time. It's a long-term game for us. Eventually, we'll win. That's what they think. So there, we have many lifetimes to wait. The other ones don't. I don't know if it answers your question, but and I think the Supreme Court is as a force against it in a way. They're trying to, I would say, fight the non-pluralist views through pluralism or through liberal rulings. That works to some degree, only if they have the Knesset that doesn't want to limit them. Right. And I understand, if you ask an ultra-Orthodox, he'll say, well, the Mashiach will come when all Jewish people will become religious. So if that's what you say, of course someone who drives on Yom Kippur delays the Mashiach. So how can they accept that? They can't do anything against it, but they don't accept it. They can't say, okay, you live the way you want, I will live the way I want. It doesn't work for them. So is there a negotiation? Is there a discussion at all? I don't know. Right. Only strategically, I think. Ideology has not changed for them at all, only went to the extreme. That's what I think. Sure. So, no, wait. The last, this is a Rav Kook, Rabbi Kook. You heard of him? Which I love. And I translated he said it in Hebrew, so I'll just read it in English first. My translation. Well, the great love we have for our nation will not blind us from criticizing all of its faults, but even after the more uninhibited criticism, we can find its essence free from any defect. You are so pretty, my darling, bearing no faults. And in Hebrew, I love the Hebrew one because that's how he said it. האהבה הגדולה שאנחנו אוהבים את אומתנו לא תסמא את עינינו מלבקר את כל מומיה, אבל הננו מוצאים את עצמיותה גם אחרי הביקורת היותר חופשית נקייה מכל מום. כולך יפה רעייתי ומומן בך. You're perfect in your imperfection, he says about Israel. And the last thing is, כל ישראל ערבים זה לזה, like all Israel are guaranteeing each other. We watch each other's back, and this is the motto of being Israeli. And right now, it is not held by all people, and that's the sad part. okay? And hopefully through the new negotiation with the president, people will have more compassion to each other and understand both perspectives, okay? Even though I sound like I'm against the reform, as I said, I'm not against all of it. I'm against being extreme to either direction. And just find something that will unite us together instead of create more separation. That is my hope and belief. Thank you.
I just want to really thank Eitan and Kelly for bringing a whole lot of nuance and empathy to a very charged conversation where it's very easy to not seek nuance and empathy. And I want to particularly reflect for a progressive American audience, which I'm presuming that many of us are, you know, when we look at the reform as a mirror of American politics, there's a lot of tactics that the right-wing parties are pushing on the reform that left-wingers in America have been proposing for America, right? Like court packing with more progressive justices, or, you know, the outrage that progressives felt when Texas passed their abortion ban because it enabled people without standing to bring a case, to bring a lawsuit. So, you know, I think I'm really appreciating, Eitan and Kelly, how you brought nuance to this conversation and sort of pointed out to us how we might be able to perhaps empathize with goals of even right-wing Israelis that we don't expect to empathize with. So what's next for us at Temple Beth Israel is the question of what's next for us personally, and how do we relate to this? How do we practice empathy with each other and keeping our minds open even as we perhaps advocate for whatever it is that we're advocating for? If you haven't already signed up and you are available the next 2 Sunday evenings, I encourage you to join us for the 2-part Resetting the Table workshop that Eitan and Kelly and I have all received training to facilitate. Information about that is available in the email that went out to TBI members and to the Jewish Federation of Lane County, as well as, I believe, on Temple Beth Israel's website, but if you have trouble finding it, you can let us know. And very much in keeping with Eitan's final quote, no matter how you feel about what is happening in Israel right now, the existence of a Jewish people in a Jewish state is still a modern miracle, and we hope that you will join us to celebrate that fact for Yom HaAtzmaut on Sunday, April 23rd. Eitan and Kelly, again, have been doing a lot of work to coordinate a really memorable Israeli shuk experience, and they are still looking for many volunteers. So talk to them if you're willing to volunteer your time to help make that happen. And again, please, our thanks.